Hey everybody, it's Josh. I wanted to talk today about suffering, but in a different way. I wanted to talk about suffering that has yet to happen. So, anxiety that leads to suffering. I got a comment last night about a man who, I'm not sure what his disability was, but he was disabled. And he really had found hope in the support he'd gotten from his wife and his children, the people around him. And he said that it had made him, it lifted him up so much. But then he had heard something I had said about how, a lot of times there's further to fall. I did not mean that to give people this sort of anxiety like, oh, it's always going to get worse. I think that we have to get to the lowest point before we are truly ready to open ourselves up to God and that personal connection with Him. So when I first had my disability, I thought I was at my lowest point. Things kept happening, and I really wasn't looking for God at the time, but yet I was still kind of angry with Him that He would have let me go through that at all. So me not seeking God I was the only one to blame. But I was so blinded by my suffering that I could not see that. When God finally did save me about 13 years after my first, back surgery and everything, He showed me that suffering was not necessary. It had been necessary to that point because I had to learn those lessons. But that was a completely different chapter in my life. And I think that I've always compared it to that Amish tradition of Rumspringa, where they send their children out to the English world, the real world, the non-Amish world, and they tell them to go and live. Just saw a hawk fly by. They tell them to go out and just live it up, experience the world, and then you decide whether you're ready to come back to the Amish community and the Amish faith, or you're going to be gone from it forever. I think that got the biting bugs, just making sure. I think that is an important chapter of our lives. And it seems to happen to us later in life than it did in the earlier generations, from the silent generation and even the boomers, really. We're living longer lives. We're less mature. We don't know our purpose or have any real feel like we have meaning a lot of times. I mean, obviously that is just in general. There's plenty that do. Plenty that get it figured out and are on their way to having a good job and a good family and a good life. At an early age. Their teens or 20s sometimes that early. Some of us it takes till our 60s or 70s. Because we are so lost in this modern world that we just don't know where we fit in anymore. But the man commented to me that he was worried that the worst is yet to come. And he referenced something that I'd said. I don't remember exactly what it was. but basically about having farther to fall a lot of times. Or I've mentioned that our faith is always tested. That is completely different than having farther to fall. So we worry about these things for what reason? Haven't you suffered enough that you don't have to create problems? That's not in human nature, though, is it? A lot of times we will create these things, just out of thin air, just whatever we need to have that internal suffering. I'll see a lot of, rich kids at college, for instance, and they seem to have no purpose in life. I'm going to try to move over here a little bit. They seem to have no purpose because they've had a sheltered life. Their parents have given them everything that they wanted. They've spoiled them rotten. And I know plenty of people like this. They spoiled them. They think they're royalty, and they think that they need to take up a cause and that they are the ultimate authority on it because they are obviously so much smarter and better. They act like we should all be equal and everything, but they really think they're superior to everyone. At least everyone in the lower classes. It's just kind of how it's been for a long time. When you live a life of privilege, and not the type of privilege that they usually talk about, when you live a life where you're spoiled and you've never wanted for anything, you've never gone hungry, you've never had your heart broken, you've never experienced traumatic loss of someone who is very dear to you, you've barely ever been hurt in your life. Maybe a couple little physical things here and there, but not much. You are never going to be pressed into that diamond that needs that pressure, that needs that suffering to form from the coal. But they create these problems in their heads, and we all do. I see myself constantly catching myself just saying, oh wow, what if this happens? What if this happens? And I'll tell you a story that I told him in the comment in the reply. When God saved me, and he told me to go out and to study the religions and the philosophies and spiritualities, and so I did, and there were many that really I was intrigued with, and I still am. But the kind of New Age spirituality was a big one, and they have a thing called the Dark Night of the Soul. I know I've talked about that a little bit before. They have the Dark Night of the Soul. And that Dark Night of the Soul is where you go from this bliss, this all-encompassing peace and understanding, connection with the world, because it's the first time you've really connected with the spiritual world, so something outside of our reality. But then you go into this dark night of the soul, and it's just depression. It's just you lose that bliss and that peace and that joy that you had, and you feel like you're slipping away again. And they say it could last a year or two sometimes. They say it can last a long time. Watched a lot of things on it. So I was like, wow, that's probably going to happen to me. I've never felt this good in my life. I've never felt this miraculous peace in my life So it's certainly going to at least fade. And I'm going to be right back to where I was. And yes, I will have had that connection and that spirituality, but now it could be even worse, because you've had everything. You've had paradise and you lost it. So I got myself worried, and I was like, oh, when is this going to happen? How do I prepare myself for this? And so I waited and I waited. And I didn't think it was definitely going to happen to me, but I figured it happened to so many people who had these spiritual awakenings, so it's most likely going to happen to me. But then God showed me that these people who have these spiritual awakenings, they have not connected with Him. They've connected with the spiritual world, which is far from God. We might think it is supernatural, so we think it's something we can't see or comprehend necessarily, so we think it's God. We think that's the end point. But God said, no. As long as your faith in me remains strong, you will keep these gifts that I've given you. And so I felt an even stronger peace. And times kept getting tougher and tougher, on paper. Obviously bad things happening, parents and family getting sick, and just more pain from my back. I was probably due for another surgery, 5 years ago. And so I was just relieved. And that is one of the things that showed me, along with several other things from New Age spirituality and many other religions. It's not the only thing I studied. It's just kind of what stood out to me, because it seems to be the trendy thing, the popular thing right now. And so that is the catalyst, and one of the big things that showed me that I needed to go back to Christ. I needed to rediscover Christ. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I understand exactly why so many just roll their eyes and just can't stand to hear it. Even that name, Jesus Christ. Because probably their parents used it to restrict them from doing all the things that they wanted to do. Or maybe they were abusive parents and they just said they were Christians, just like the slave owners or the Crusades, or all of the evil deeds done in the name of Christ that weren't even close to what Christ is really about. So I knew, that's when I knew for sure that God was leading me back to Christ. It's hard to really get a great idea of what God is telling you sometimes, even when when he really wants you to know something, he'll let you know. But he likes to let us figure things out on our own, and just gives us a starting point most of the time to go from and explore on our own. Because if we don't do things on our own, then it lacks the substance. It lacks the magnitude it does when we do things hands-on. It's like reading thing in a textbook in school versus reading how to dissect a frog, let's say, versus actually going and dissecting the frog. You can learn all about dissecting the frog from a textbook, But you won't know exactly what it's like until you get your hands in there and in that gunk and formaldehyde and do it yourself. So God wants us. There is the phrase, God helps those that help themselves. And that is absolutely true. But God also gives us guidance so we can help ourselves. We might feel from that phrase that we're going into things blindly. And I get it. It feels that way through most of our lives because that is our time of self-discovery. Our time to be out there seeing the world the way the Amish kids do and deciding whether we're going to make ourselves back to God or not. But it's a little different because often we don't even remember being with God. When we're a child, our brains aren't developed enough to understand that we are closest to God than maybe we'll ever be. Watching the animals. I love seeing the animals run around me while I do these videos. Oh, there's a little squirrel just galloping down the trail there. Probably running from that hawk that I saw flying just a couple minutes ago. But I don't want you to feel like I am telling you things are going to get worse. So hold on, man. Oh, man. No. I tell my girls every day, my children, you know, they're 10 and 7 now. I tell them, well, one's almost 7. She'll be in about a month, less than a month. I tell them, when we're going to bed, I often talk to them about how, you know, what they're just thinking, you know, just what's on their mind. I just like to talk to them. My oldest likes to tell me about her troubles with the kids at school that bully her or are mean to her, and then a lot of times what her friends will be doing. But I always say, have a great day at school tomorrow. And both of them like to say, oh, it's going to suck so bad. It's going to be so awful. You know, it's going to be, it's going to be awful. And I said, what? Why? Well, the fact that you're saying that right now means it probably will be. Because our mind is powerful. And that's another thing that New Age spirituality, they talk about that manifesting reality. And we can do it to a certain extent. It's true. You focus on something enough, you're going to get it done. But what God wants us to do, or what he showed me about that whole thing, because I was like, God, this doesn't make any sense. I trust you guiding me. I don't want to manifest anything because I don't know whether I'm going to be manifesting something that you don't want. And why would I think that I know? I've already spent the last 13 years of my life manifesting just suffering nonstop. So why do I think that I know what I should be doing? Manifesting wealth, manifesting love, you don't understand. God takes you where you need to go. All you have to do is manifest that positive mindset wherever you go. And really, you're not doing that yourself. You're taking that from him. You're taking the hope and the peace that he gave you and applying it to everything. So when I tell my girls, you need to tell yourself every single day, every single night, and every morning, it's going to be an amazing day. And it might not always be. It's not always going to be. Guess what? Life sucks sometimes. There's going to be things that happen that just aren't fun. But those are the days that sometimes teach us the most. We don't learn anything without suffering. We don't learn anything without a little bit of pain. So those days that are bad, you say, okay, this day was bad. Tomorrow's going to be amazing. Just like we should say every day. So tomorrow is going to be great. But you really should be living in the present. But you understand that tomorrow you might have the same things happen that made your day bad that day. And if your mindset is, oh, it's going to be awful, then you're going to be sitting there thinking about all those problems that you had and how they're just going to happen again. The kids at school are going to pick on me again. You know, the people at work are going to pick on, work's going to suck today. You know, I'm going to be in extra pain today because I was yesterday. No. You go into the bad days and the good days with the peace and the clarity that God grants you. You can even achieve this somewhat before you find God. You can train your mind to be positive. And you just tell yourself every day, all right, it's going to be a great day. And if it's not, I'm going to learn every single lesson I need to learn to avoid having that happen again. So, with my back pain, I know every day I'm going to wake up. Some days are going to be better than others. Some days I actually feel halfway decent for at least a little bit of the day. But I used to go to sleep every night thinking, tomorrow's just going to be another long drudge of pain. So why would I look forward to that? But I built this arsenal, you see. Everything you should think of as a war of peace oftentimes, but it's a war however you make it. It can be a war of violence, it can be a war of peace, it's anything you make it in your mind. So to attack this pain, I knew I had to make myself get my ass out of bed, get my ass out of the chair, and go walking or swimming or into the pool to work out. And then there was different things that I could do. I found out almost right away that a recliner takes the pressure off my back a certain way. And there were certain things I couldn't do. Another bug. Or it would just make my pain worse. And you have that arsenal, and the days that you wake up and you're like, oh man, this pain is almost overwhelming. You find whatever you have in that arsenal and you use it against it. And you might lose the battle that day. You're going to lose plenty of battles. But as long as you're standing, as long as you're still in the fight, that war's not over. So please don't tell yourself, man, I'm so terrified of what's to come. Maybe the person that comment, like I said, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll have to reread it to make sure, but he didn't tell me exactly what his disability was, but he mentioned how it was progressively getting worse. And okay, there's plenty of those things that progressively most disabilities do get worse. There's very few that get better over time. So you think about, man, Soon I might not even be walking. But you're walking right now. So get up and move those legs. Get up and walk as far as you can without causing just excruciating pain. Get out and do what you can while you can do it. Don't worry about, I might not be able to walk tomorrow or the next day or a week or a month or a year away from now. That does you no good. First of all, you don't even know that. There could be some breakthrough in science that completely heals your situation. God could come and heal you. God's often usually in the spiritual healing game, not the physical healing game, but look at the Bible, look at millions of accounts where he has healed the physically disabled or ill. But the spiritual is all you need. You can be... I like to watch things that give me inspiration and hope a lot of times, especially when I'm down. One thing I watched, this has been a long time ago, not a long time ago, maybe a couple years ago, a movie called Father Stu, I believe it was. It was a Mark Wahlberg movie. And it's a true story about a priest or a man who was just wild, drinking, alcoholic, womanizer, all these things. And finally he meets this woman who is in the church, but he doesn't settle down. He's like, he keeps going after her and pretending he's going to be in the church and kind of, pretending he's like real religious, but he's not, just to try to get this woman to fall in love with him. And I'm not going to give away the whole story, but I guess it is a true story, so I'll give it away. I guess I'll give it away. So if you don't want to hear it, spoiler alert, maybe fast forward through this part. But he has, one night he is at a low point. He's at the bar and he sees a man that looks like Jesus. It's Jesus telling him, you don't need to be driving. You don't need to. And he didn't want to hear it. He's just like, he's stubborn, like most of us are. Went out there, bam, wrecked his car. He almost died, and he saw, I believe it was the Virgin Mary. He saw her, and it changed everything. Come to find out, he has a debilitating illness to where he's progressively getting worse, like ALS, or I'm not sure exactly what it's called. I mean, I think it was something like that. And so at the end, he'd given up everything to follow his calling and become a priest. And the other priests are like, who's this guy? He's a maniac. Kind of reminds me of the Apostle Paul, really. Or maybe the Apostle Paul after God saved him. And he says something that will stuck with me forever. He was up there when he finally was able to become a priest, because the Catholic Church didn't want anything to do with him, but the other priests and a lot of his friends and stuff that he'd made, they lobbied for him, and he finally became a priest like he wanted to, but he was almost gone. He was almost done. He couldn't walk anymore. He couldn't do anything really for himself anymore. Barely get himself dressed. And he said in a sermon one day, he said, "The suffering brings us closer to Christ." And that stuck with me so much, because this was before God even saved me. And I went through that period where I could feel something's changing, but I didn't trust myself anymore because I'd been without God for so long in my life. And the movie just made me cry. Like tears just started streaming down my eyes. The suffering truly does bring us closer to Christ. It is why, as a child, you try so hard to, well, the church and your parents might try so hard to kind of get you into the faith, whatever Christianity they're in or whatever, or really most faiths. Some of the strict faiths, the children accept it because they need order and structure in their lives. A lot of us do need order and structure in our lives. But really, we have to go through that suffering, I believe, before we truly can understand what the whole message of Christ was all about. So do not suffer for things that have yet to happen. Do not suffer at all. Say you're going to have to let the pain in because it's going to make its way in eventually. You don't invite it in. You let it come. You say, okay, we're getting you out of here as quick as we can. And if you're going to stick around for a while, you're going to follow the house rules. And you always make sure the peace is camped out right in your heart and soul. And that joy and that beauty. And it'll instruct the pain, hey, you can come and do your thing because I understand that you're necessary. Pain's always going to be here. As long as we're in this earth. But you don't need to stay any longer than you have to, and we're definitely not going to be suffering for you. We've done enough of that already. We've all done plenty of suffering. We've grieved, we've had our hearts broken, we've been in physical and mental and spiritual pain. Too much suffering. But maybe just enough. Just enough to open our eyes and tell ourselves, hey, we've been through hell and back. We know what the deal is. And tomorrow is going to be an amazing day. But not only that, so is today. I love you all. Hope you have a great weekend, great Sunday. I will talk to you as soon as I can, hopefully to do a video tomorrow. God bless you all.